It was a bright, warm afternoon, and the town was alive with the quiet hum of daily life. Shops were open, children's laughter floated from a nearby park, and cars moved slowly down the streets. Alex, a veteran in his late 40s, decided to step out for a short walk and some errands. He had always preferred to keep his days simple, avoiding unnecessary fuss, even though he carried the memories of his military service wherever he went. Alex wore a worn-out green jacket that had patches from his years of service, a quiet badge of honor that many overlooked. He walked with a calm and measured pace, enjoying the sunlight and the slight breeze that carried the scent of fresh flowers from a small garden nearby. Despite his outward calm, he carried an inner strength, one shaped by years of discipline and experience that had taught him the importance of patience and self-control. As he reached the corner near the local cafe, Alex noticed a group of bikers gathered in the parking lot. They were a rough-looking crowd, wearing leather jackets and chains, some with tattoos that stretched across their arms and necks. He had seen them around town before, often laughing loudly, revving their motorcycles, and sometimes intimidating strangers who wandered too close. Most people tried to avoid them, sensing trouble if they got in the bikers' way. Alex tried to ignore them and focus on his errands. He adjusted his jacket slightly and walked past, keeping his gaze forward. But it seemed the bikers had noticed him. One of them, a tall man with a thick beard and a leather vest covered in patches, nudged the others and pointed at Alex. A smirk crossed his face, and he shouted something that made the group laugh. Their laughter was loud and cruel, carrying a tone that suggested they were used to getting their way and enjoying the discomfort of others. Alex felt a flicker of irritation, but he forced himself to remain calm. He had faced danger in ways these men could never imagine, yet he knew that reacting impulsively could only escalate the situation. Still, a knot of unease formed in his stomach. He could feel the stares, the energy of the group closing in like a shadow around him. One of the bikers stepped closer, his boots clicking against the pavement. He leaned slightly, speaking in a voice meant to intimidate. "Hey, old man," he said, laughing. "Where do you think you're going in that jacket? You look like you should be telling war stories to kids at a library." Alex didn't respond immediately. Instead, he kept walking, his hands in his pockets. He could hear the mocking tone, but he reminded himself that staying composed was more powerful than responding with anger. He had learned long ago that some battles weren't worth fighting in the moment, especially when the enemy didn't know what you were capable of. The bikers followed him, their laughter growing louder, trying to provoke a reaction. One of them pushed lightly against his shopping cart, rattling the contents inside. Alex paused for a moment to adjust the cart, making sure nothing fell out, all the while keeping his expression neutral. He felt his heart rate quicken slightly, a natural response, but he refused to let fear or anger take control. Passers-by began to notice the scene. Some stopped briefly, unsure whether to step in or stay away. A woman crossing the street held her child closer and whispered a quick warning. A man on a nearby bench watched with narrowed eyes but didn't move. Everyone sensed the tension, yet no one acted, waiting to see how Alex would handle the situation. Despite the pressure, Alex moved slowly, deliberately, like a man who had faced storms and come out stronger on the other side. He remembered the countless situations during his service where staying calm had saved lives, where patience had been more valuable than immediate action. This was a smaller battle, yes, but the same principles applied. He wasn't just walking away. He was maintaining control. The bikers tried again, this time mocking his age and physical appearance. "Bet you can't even lift that cart properly," one of them shouted, laughing. Another added, "Old war hero, huh? We'll see how brave you really are." Their words were designed to sting, to make him feel small in public. Alex took a deep breath. He didn't reply. Instead, he focused on his surroundings, the sounds of the town, the hum of engines, the chatter from the cafe, and even the birds above. His mind ran through a plan, subtle and careful. He knew he could handle them, but confrontation wasn't his goal. Avoiding unnecessary conflict while maintaining authority was his method, a tactic that had served him well for decades. He continued toward his car, parked a short distance away. The bikers kept pace, circling around him, trying to corner him without making it obvious. Alex could feel the heat of the situation rising. He noticed the small crowd watching, some curious, some worried. He knew that any wrong move could escalate things quickly. The lesson he had learned over years of service came back to him. Stay calm, stay aware, and always have an exit plan. As he reached his car, Alex subtly checked his phone. Nothing looked unusual, but he knew he had one line of action that could change everything. The bikers didn't notice the slight movement. They were too focused on mocking him and trying to push boundaries. Alex opened the door, placed his shopping bag carefully inside, and then closed it with a calm click, signaling that he wasn't flustered. One of the bikers, growing bolder, took a step closer and pretended to nudge his shoulder. Alex felt the small bump, felt the adrenaline surge, but he didn't react. Instead, he leaned slightly as if stretching and adjusted his jacket. His movements were casual, deliberate, and confident. This small display of control made a subtle impression on the group, though they didn't recognize it yet. The bikers continued to circle, making low jokes and whispers. One of them, a younger man with a scar on his cheek, shouted something unintelligible, and the others laughed, feeding off each other's energy. Alex felt a mix of frustration and calm. Frustration at their childish behavior, calm because he knew he had a way to end this without violence. He finally reached his car fully and slid into the driver's seat. From inside, he could see them clearly, their faces mocking, their posture aggressive. He sat quietly for a moment, gripping the steering wheel lightly, thinking. The town seemed to hold its breath. The small crowd of onlookers remained, watching with curiosity and unease. Then Alex picked up his phone and dialed a number he knew would command respect. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need threats. He just needed to connect with someone who could ensure that these men understood the consequences of their actions. The bikers, still outside, remained unaware of what was happening inside the car, their confidence still unshaken, for now. He spoke quietly but firmly, explaining the situation. The tone in his voice carried authority, calmness, and subtle warning all at once. On the other end of the line, someone familiar with both Alex and the local dynamics listened intently, and Alex knew that this call would turn the situation around. Inside, he felt a small sense of relief. The tension in his shoulders eased slightly, but he didn't let his guard down. He stayed alert, aware of every movement outside the car. The bikers continued their posturing for a moment, but something had shifted subtly. An uncertainty began to creep into their demeanor, though they didn't realize it yet. The sunlight continued to shine, and the town carried on as usual, unaware that a quiet confrontation was unfolding in its midst. Alex sat there calm, composed, and ready. He knew that the situation would soon change, and he was prepared to handle it with the same patience and strategy that had guided him through years of service. Even in that tense moment, Alex reflected on what it meant to be brave. It wasn't always about standing up and fighting. Sometimes it was about knowing when to act, when to wait, and when to use wisdom over strength. He had faced dangers far greater in his life, and he knew that keeping his composure was a sign of true courage, not weakness. As he waited for the response on the other end of the line, Alex's mind was clear. He was ready, not just to protect himself, but to ensure that justice and respect were upheld. The bikers had underestimated him, as many people did, but they were about to learn that patience, strategy, and a calm mind could be more powerful than brute force. The tension in the parking lot grew heavier as the bikers continued to circle Alex's car. Their laughter, which had once been full of confidence, now carried a sharper edge, a mix of impatience and curiosity. One of the bikers, a stocky man with a thick chain around his neck, leaned on the hood of Alex's car. He tapped it lightly, smirking as if testing how far he could push without consequence. "Old man," he shouted, "what are you going to do? Sit there and call someone while we have some fun?" Alex didn't answer. He kept his calm, letting the words wash over him without emotion. Inside, he felt a flicker of irritation, but he knew that reacting would give them exactly what they wanted, a reaction, a display of fear or anger. He had learned long ago that people like this fed on such responses. His hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, fingers tapping rhythmically, a subtle display of control he didn't even notice. A few onlookers had gathered now. A young couple stood across the street whispering to each other, their eyes darting back and forth between Alex and the bikers. An older man leaned against a lamppost, frowning, unsure if he should intervene. Everyone sensed the danger, but no one moved. The tension was thick enough to touch, and Alex felt it in the pit of his stomach. Yet he remained calm. The bikers, growing bolder, decided to escalate. One of them, a younger man with a scar along his cheek, stepped closer, leaning into the driver's side window. "Hey, you really think calling someone is going to save you?" he sneered. "We could mess up your day before they even answer." Alex looked at him through the rearview mirror, his eyes steady and unwavering. He didn't speak. He didn't flinch. His silence was deliberate, a quiet storm waiting to break. The younger man leaned back, a little taken aback by Alex's calmness. Most people would have snapped, shouted, or even lunged, but Alex was different. He had been trained to handle pressure, to stay aware of every move, every threat, and to make calculated decisions rather than impulsive ones. The bikers continued their taunting, trying to provoke a reaction. One of them kicked lightly at the tires of the car, then laughed loudly. Another shouted something about Alex's jacket, mocking the patches that told the story of his service. "What's all that, old man?" "Your army stories. Bet you can't even lift a bike." Alex's mind raced, not with anger, but with strategy. He knew that if this escalated, it could become dangerous. The small crowd of onlookers could get involved, or worse, someone might call the police and create a bigger scene. But he also knew that he had a resource that these bikers hadn't anticipated. A connection. Someone who could ensure their behavior wouldn't go unchecked. He took a slow, deep breath, feeling the tension in his shoulders ease slightly. He tapped the steering wheel again, a small rhythmic motion that seemed to calm him further. It was a subtle reminder to himself that he was in control, no matter how threatening the bikers appeared. He could feel their eyes on him, searching for weakness, but there was none to find. One biker, growing more impatient, began pacing in front of the car. He muttered under his breath, clearly frustrated that Alex hadn't reacted. "Come on, old man. Don't just sit there. Do something." Alex's mind remained focused. He knew that the biker's aggression was mostly posturing, a way to show dominance and provoke fear. They didn't realize that Alex's years of service had taught him patience and awareness, far beyond their understanding. Every movement, every gesture was calculated. He didn't need to prove himself to them. He subtly reached for his phone again, pretending to check messages. The bikers didn't notice, their attention fully on him. Alex knew that this call would shift everything. It wasn't a threat. It was a demonstration of authority, a reminder that actions have consequences. And these bikers, for all their bluster, had not yet realized the power of a quiet, calculated presence. Meanwhile, a few townspeople whispered among themselves. "Who is that man?" one woman asked softly. "He doesn't look scared at all." "He's got to be tough," another replied. Most people would have run by now. The bikers continued to escalate, trying to test Alex further. One of them swung a fist lightly, hitting the car door in a mocking gesture. "What's the matter? Can't handle a little fun?" Alex's face remained neutral. He didn't move, didn't shout, didn't retaliate. Instead, he focused on his breathing, steadying his mind. Inside, he felt the familiar surge of calm that had carried him through dangerous missions and tense standoffs during his service. He knew that keeping his composure was the first step toward resolving this without harm. The younger biker, frustrated by the lack of reaction, began gesturing wildly, shouting louder, trying to incite the others to act. But Alex's calmness seemed to confuse them. They were used to people reacting, to seeing fear, anger, or panic. This silence was unexpected, and it made them hesitate. Alex finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "I don't want trouble," he said. "You're free to leave. But if this continues, there will be consequences." The bikers paused for a moment, glancing at each other. They hadn't expected a response like this. It wasn't fear, it wasn't even anger. It was controlled, measured authority, the kind that commanded attention without shouting. One of the bikers, the tallest of the group, stepped closer, clearly trying to intimidate Alex again. He leaned slightly against the car, his face inches from the window. "Consequences?" he said with a smirk. "What are you going to do, call someone? Who's going to help you?" Alex didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for his phone, placing it carefully on the passenger seat. He pretended to scroll through it, a casual movement that didn't give away his intentions. The bikers leaned in, curiosity mixed with suspicion. He finally made the call, speaking quietly, clearly but without raising his voice. The bikers, still focused on him, didn't notice at first, but within moments subtle changes began to show. One biker looked over his shoulder nervously. Another straightened slightly, uncertainty creeping into his posture. Alex's words were calm, precise. He didn't need to shout or threaten. His tone alone carried authority. The person on the other end of the line listened intently, asking questions and providing instructions. Alex responded, maintaining his composure throughout. The bikers sensed the shift before they fully understood it. Something had changed. Their confidence faltered, their laughter faded. The energy in the parking lot shifted, and the small crowd of onlookers noticed it immediately. The bikers, who had been so bold just moments ago, began to look unsure, exchanging nervous glances. One of the younger bikers muttered under his breath, clearly frustrated that Alex hadn't reacted with fear or anger. The older bikers didn't say anything, their posturing weakened by the subtle authority Alex now projected. He didn't move, didn't shout, didn't show any signs of intimidation. His silence spoke volumes, and the bikers could feel it, even if they didn't fully understand why. As the conversation on the phone continued, Alex's mind remained clear. He was aware of every movement, every sound, every glance from the bikers and the crowd. He knew that in just a few moments this situation could change entirely, and he was ready. The tension slowly began to dissolve. The bikers' aggressive stance weakened, their laughter no longer confident. Alex didn't need to say anything more. The message had been delivered. He had shown through calmness, awareness, and a single phone call that he was not a man to be bullied or intimidated. The onlookers, who had been tense and worried, began to relax. Whispers of admiration circulated through the small crowd. "Look at him," one woman said softly. "He didn't even flinch." "That's real courage," an older man added. "You can see it in how calm he is. Most people would have lost it already." Alex remained in the car, finishing the conversation on the phone. Every word he spoke was deliberate, controlled, and calm. He didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten directly, yet the authority in his tone was unmistakable. The bikers finally seemed to understand that this was not just a man. They were dealing with someone who had connections, experience, and the ability to command respect without violence. Within minutes, the bikers' posturing collapsed. The tallest one muttered something vague, a mix of apology and confusion. The younger bikers looked at each other, unsure of what to do next. They stepped back slightly, their confidence diminished. Alex's calm presence, combined with a single phone call, had turned the situation completely. Alex ended the call, placed his phone down, and sat quietly for a moment, observing the bikers' reactions. They were no longer a threat. Their laughter was gone, replaced by cautious glances and hesitant movements. He unlocked the car, ready to leave, but remained alert. He knew better than to assume the situation was entirely resolved. Yet he also knew that the balance of power had shifted clearly in his favor. The small crowd around the parking lot began to disperse, murmuring among themselves about what had just happened. Alex started the car, taking a deep breath, and prepared to drive away. The bikers, realizing that their intimidation had failed, stepped aside, giving him a clear path. Even as he drove away, Alex reflected on what had occurred. Courage, he realized, wasn't always about confrontation or aggression. Sometimes it was about strategy, patience, and using the resources available wisely. He hadn't needed to fight. He hadn't needed to shout or threaten. He had used calmness, awareness, and one simple phone call to turn a dangerous situation around entirely. Alex could feel the shift in the air even before the first words were exchanged on the phone. The bikers had been loud, aggressive, and confident, but now there was a slight hesitation in their movements, a flicker of uncertainty they didn't fully understand. They didn't know what Alex had in his pocket, but they could sense that he wasn't just any ordinary man. He had seen people like this before, bullies, loud and threatening, used to taking control of situations, but they rarely met someone who held themselves with such calm authority. Alex spoke softly into the phone, his voice steady and controlled. "I need your help," he said. "There's a group here harassing me in the parking lot. They're bikers known for causing trouble. I don't want to fight, but they need to understand there are consequences." On the other end, a familiar voice responded, calm and authoritative. "Stay in the car. Don't engage. I'll handle this." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Alex knew his friend had experience with situations like this and could make sure the bikers wouldn't push things further. As he spoke, Alex could feel the bikers' attention on him, though they didn't realize the nature of the call. One of the younger bikers leaned forward slightly, squinting, trying to read his expression through the tinted glass. Another tapped the hood of the car again, Still unsure why Alex hadn't reacted, why he wasn't scared. Their laughter had died down, replaced by nervous murmurs. Alex's mind remained clear. He remembered his training, his years of service, and the countless situations where patience and observation had been more valuable than force. He didn't need to shout, didn't need to intimidate. He simply needed to act with precision and calm authority. That alone would shift the balance. The biker leaning closest to the window made a half-hearted joke. "You really think calling someone will save you, old man?" he said, smirking, trying to provoke a reaction. Alex didn't answer. He continued speaking quietly on the phone, giving just enough information for the person on the other end to understand the situation. His eyes stayed on the bikers through the rearview mirror, calm but alert. He could feel the shift in their demeanor. They were starting to realize that this wasn't going to be an ordinary confrontation. Minutes passed, each one stretching longer than the last. The bikers looked at each other, their smirks fading. One of the older men muttered something under his breath, a mix of frustration and doubt. Alex could see the subtle change in body language. Shoulders tensed less, movement slower, the air of arrogance fading. They had met someone who wasn't reacting in the way they expected, and it was throwing them off balance. Alex kept his voice low and deliberate on the phone. "They're waiting to see what you'll do," he explained calmly. "I'm not making threats. I just need you to make it clear that this behavior won't be tolerated." The person on the other end, understanding the situation immediately, responded with authority. "Tell them to leave," he said firmly. "Make it clear that if they don't, there will be serious consequences." Alex ended the call with a simple thank you, setting the phone down gently on the passenger seat. He didn't feel the need to display anger or aggression. The power of the situation had already shifted. The bikers, who had been so loud and confident, now seemed hesitant, unsure of what to do next. Their earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by an unspoken tension that made them step back slightly. One of the younger bikers whispered something to his companion. The words were inaudible to Alex, but the tone was clear: confusion, surprise, and a hint of fear. They had underestimated this man. They had assumed he would react with fear, anger, or aggression, and when none of those reactions appeared, they were thrown off. Alex opened his car door slowly, making no sudden movements, his posture calm and controlled. The bikers instinctively stepped back, creating a little space around the vehicle. Even though Alex didn't raise his voice or make threats, the authority he projected was undeniable. He had learned over the years that presence could speak louder than words. "Everyone here can leave now," Alex said quietly but firmly. "This doesn't have to get worse. You know the rules." The tallest biker glanced at the others, uncertain. They had been loud, aggressive, and dominant just moments ago, but now their energy had changed. The younger bikers shuffled slightly, casting nervous looks toward Alex. The realization began to sink in. They weren't dealing with an ordinary person. This was someone who had authority, someone who could make things happen quietly but effectively. Alex didn't raise his voice, didn't make any sudden movements. He simply stood there, calm and aware, letting his presence speak for itself. The bikers hesitated, their bravado faltering. The power dynamics had shifted completely. After a few tense moments, the tallest biker muttered something under his breath and stepped back. The others followed suit, slowly moving away from the car. Their laughter had disappeared, replaced by cautious glances and whispered conversation. They were realizing, perhaps for the first time, that their intimidation tactics would not work on this man. Alex remained calm, observing every movement. He didn't need to say more. The message had been delivered. Authority didn't need to be loud or violent. It could be quiet, steady, and undeniable. He could see the recognition in the bikers' body language. They understood that further aggression would be unwise. The small crowd of onlookers, who had been tense and anxious, began to relax. Some whispered to each other in amazement. "He didn't even flinch," one woman said quietly. "He stayed calm the whole time." "Look at how composed he is," an older man added. "That's real courage. You can see it in how he stands, how he doesn't react to their provocation." Alex took a slow breath, feeling the tension in his body ease slightly. He had not needed to fight, had not needed to shout, and had not needed to display anger. The situation had been resolved through calm authority, careful observation, and one strategic phone call. The bikers finally began to disperse. Their previous confidence was gone. They muttered excuses, whispered to each other, and slowly moved toward their motorcycles parked nearby. They didn't leave abruptly. They weren't humiliated in a dramatic way, but the subtle power shift was unmistakable. Alex had won without confrontation, without raising his voice, simply through calm authority and strategy. As he watched them leave, Alex reflected on the situation. He had faced danger before, in ways that most people could never imagine, but this was a different kind of challenge. It wasn't about physical strength or aggression. It was about patience, awareness, and knowing how to use the right resources at the right time. Courage wasn't always about fighting. Sometimes it was about strategy and calm presence. The onlookers who had been watching with bated breath began to disperse slowly, whispering about what had just happened. The story of this quiet confrontation would likely be repeated in the town for days. Alex remained in his car for a moment, letting the calm settle over him. He didn't feel the need to boast or explain. He had handled the situation, and that was enough. Even as he prepared to drive away, Alex knew that this encounter had taught a subtle but important lesson to those watching, and perhaps even to the bikers themselves. Real strength, real courage didn't always come from confrontation. It came from awareness, patience, and the ability to act decisively and calmly when the moment demanded it. The sun was still shining, the town continued its quiet hum, and life went on around him. But for those who had witnessed the confrontation, it was clear that Alex was someone to be respected, someone who carried authority not through threats or aggression, but through quiet confidence and measured action. Alex started the car, taking a final glance at the bikers now gathering on their motorcycles. They weren't happy, but they were no longer threatening. He drove away slowly, maintaining his calm, reflecting on the encounter. There was satisfaction in knowing that he had resolved a potentially dangerous situation without resorting to violence. The lesson, he thought, was one that applied to many aspects of life. Patience, calm, and strategic action often achieved more than force ever could. As he merged onto the main road, the tension of the encounter slowly melted away, replaced by a quiet sense of pride. Not pride in confrontation, but pride in handling the situation correctly, in showing that real strength was as much about composure as it was about power. And though the bikers would likely never forget this day, Alex knew that he had emerged not just unscathed, but respected, even by those who had intended to intimidate him. After the phone call, a quiet tension hung in the parking lot. The bikers no longer laughed or mocked. Their confident postures had softened, replaced with uncertainty and cautious glances. Alex remained seated in his car for a few moments, observing them carefully. He didn't need to rush. He understood that patience and presence were more powerful than force. Every small movement, every glance from him, conveyed a calm authority that the bikers could feel but didn't fully understand. One of the older bikers, the tallest in the group, shifted uncomfortably on his feet. His arms, which had been crossed in defiance just minutes ago, now hung loosely by his sides. He muttered something to the younger ones, but the words were drowned out by the soft hum of passing traffic. The younger bikers looked at each other, clearly unsure how to proceed. They had expected an immediate reaction from Alex, anger, fear, or aggression, but his calmness was disarming. Alex slowly opened the car door and stepped out, his movements deliberate and unhurried. He didn't rush, didn't glare, didn't make any threatening gestures. He simply stood there, calm and composed, letting the weight of his presence speak for itself. The bikers instinctively took a step back. Their earlier arrogance had vanished, replaced by a cautious respect they didn't yet fully understand. The tallest biker cleared his throat, finally breaking the silence. "All right," he said, his voice quieter than before. "We get it. No trouble here. We'll leave." Alex didn't respond immediately. He simply looked at them steadily, maintaining eye contact. He could feel their hesitation, their uncertainty. It was a subtle but powerful shift. They were used to intimidating people with loud words and gestures, but they had never encountered someone who remained so calm, so aware, and so in control. One of the younger bikers muttered an apology under his breath, almost too quiet for Alex to hear. We didn't mean to," he started, then trailed off, unsure how to finish. Alex nodded slightly, acknowledging the words without needing to elaborate. His calm acceptance was enough to communicate that the situation had been defused, that no further confrontation was necessary. The bikers understood the unspoken message. They had pushed too far, and now it was time to retreat. The small crowd of onlookers who had been watching anxiously began to whisper among themselves. "Look at him," one woman said softly. "He didn't even shout. He just stood there and they backed off." "Patience and presence," an older man replied, shaking his head in admiration. "That's all it took. Most people would have lost their temper." The bikers, sensing the shift in attention, began to move toward their motorcycles parked nearby. Their steps were slow, careful, and deliberate. The loud, confident energy that had dominated the parking lot just minutes ago was gone. They were no longer a threat. Their intimidation had been neutralized without a single act of violence. Alex remained in place, observing every movement. He didn't follow them or make any gestures. His calm authority had been enough. The bikers were leaving, not humiliated, but aware that their attempts at intimidation had failed. That awareness was more powerful than any argument, more effective than any physical confrontation. As they mounted their motorcycles and prepared to ride away, Alex's mind reflected on the events that had unfolded. Courage, he realized, was not always about confrontation or aggression. Sometimes it was about awareness, patience, and the ability to act decisively when necessary. He had not needed to raise his voice, had not needed to threaten, and had not needed to use force. He had relied on calm authority and strategic action, and it had worked. The bikers revved their engines softly, a quiet acknowledgement of their departure, and then rode away, leaving the parking lot peaceful once again. The small crowd of onlookers began to disperse, whispering about what had just happened. Alex remained for a few moments, taking in the quiet, letting the tension drain from his body. He walked slowly back to his car, reflecting on the lessons of the encounter. He had faced danger before in ways that most people could never imagine, but this was different. This was about strategy, patience, and calm presence. It wasn't about fighting. It was about knowing how to use influence wisely. As he drove away, Alex felt a quiet sense of pride. Not pride in confrontation, but pride in handling the situation correctly, with dignity and awareness. The bikers would likely remember him for a long time, not because he had shouted or fought, but because he had stood his ground calmly, firmly, and with authority. The town returned to its usual rhythm. People continued their errands, children played in the park, and life went on around Alex. Yet those who had witnessed the encounter would carry the memory of the quiet man who had faced intimidation with calm strength. They would talk about him in hushed tones, admiring how he had maintained control without aggression, how he had used wisdom and presence to diffuse a potentially dangerous situation. Alex drove home slowly, reflecting on the importance of patience and composure. He had learned over the years that true courage was not about being loud or forceful. It was about understanding situations, observing carefully, and acting with precision. The bikers had tested him, but he had passed the test without raising his voice, without losing his temper, and without using violence. When he arrived home, Alex took a moment to sit quietly on his porch. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood. He felt a sense of calm settle over him. He had faced a challenge, maintained his composure, and emerged respected and safe. That was a victory in itself. As he sipped a cup of tea, he thought about the lessons from the day. Life often presented moments where people would try to intimidate or provoke, testing patience and awareness. Alex knew that handling these moments with calm authority and strategic thinking could prevent unnecessary conflict and command respect without aggression. The encounter in the parking lot was over, but its impact lingered. The bikers had learned a lesson they wouldn't forget. Some people weren't easily intimidated. Some people carried authority that didn't need to be shouted or enforced with violence. And the townspeople who had watched had seen a powerful example of courage, composure, and strategic thinking. Alex finished his tea, feeling satisfied. He hadn't sought recognition or praise. He had simply acted with the knowledge and confidence that came from experience, training, and a clear understanding of human behavior. That quiet strength was more powerful than any loud confrontation, and today it had been enough to ensure peace and respect. He looked out at the street, calm and observant, knowing that life would continue to test him in small ways. But he also knew that he had the tools to face those challenges not with force, but with patience, strategy, and quiet authority. And that, he realized, was the true measure of strength. As the evening shadows lengthened, Alex felt a sense of closure. The bikers were gone. The town had returned to normal, and he had handled the situation with dignity and intelligence. He reflected on the idea that courage was not always visible, not always dramatic. Sometimes it was quiet, subtle, and deeply human, like standing firm in the face of intimidation, remaining calm when others expected fear, and using wisdom over aggression. The lessons of the day would stay with him, as would the respect of those who had witnessed his composure. And Alex knew, quietly and confidently, that he had acted in a way that honored his experience, his values, and the principles that had guided him through life. The encounter with the bikers had ended not with a fight, but with understanding, respect, and a quiet demonstration of true strength. After the bikers had finally left, a quiet calm returned to the parking lot. The usual hum of the town resumed. Cars passing by, people walking along the sidewalks, and the distant laughter of children in the park. For most, it would have seemed like just another ordinary afternoon, but for those who had witnessed what happened, the moment left a lasting impression. They had seen someone face intimidation without fear, without aggression, and yet emerge completely unshaken. That someone was Alex, a veteran who had quietly shown what true strength looked like. As Alex walked back to his car, he reflected on the encounter. His heart rate had slowed, but the awareness of what could have happened lingered. He understood that while the bikers had backed down, the lesson he carried from this situation was more important than their retreat. Courage wasn't always about fighting or proving power. Sometimes it was about patience, observation, and knowing exactly how to act. Today had been one of those moments. Alex got into his car and started the engine. The ride home was peaceful, yet his mind was active, replaying the events in detail. He thought about the bikers' initial confidence, their mocking laughter, and the moment their energy shifted. That shift hadn't come from anger or aggression. It had come from calm authority and the right action at the right time. That realization gave him a quiet sense of satisfaction. As he drove through familiar streets, Alex noticed the small ways people had reacted. The young couple who had been standing across the street were now inside a cafe, talking quietly and gesturing toward him. An older man who had been leaning against a lamppost gave him a small nod of respect as Alex passed by. Even though they hadn't spoken directly to him, their acknowledgement of what had happened was clear. They had seen the power of composure and the impact of handling a tense situation wisely. When he reached his home, Alex parked the car and stepped out. The evening air was cool and calm, and he felt a deep sense of relief and quiet pride. He didn't feel the need to boast or tell the story to anyone. The experience had already reinforced something important within him. True courage wasn't about proving oneself in the moment. It was about knowing how to handle life's challenges with wisdom, patience, and dignity. Alex walked into his small kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. He leaned against the counter, thinking about the biker's reaction. It was fascinating how quickly fear or respect could replace arrogance when someone displayed quiet authority. He realized that many people relied on noise, aggression, or intimidation to get their way, but real influence often came from restraint, awareness, and calm decision-making. The day had also given Alex a chance to reflect on the importance of community. The onlookers had watched quietly, unsure at first what to do, but they had been witness to a lesson in courage. Sometimes courage wasn't about dramatic acts or loud confrontations. It was about demonstrating strength through action, presence, and integrity. The people who had watched would carry that lesson with them, perhaps noticing it in their own lives when faced with challenges. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the street, Alex thought about the bikers one last time. They weren't evil, just misguided and accustomed to using fear as a tool. Today he had shown them that there were consequences for intimidation, and that strength could take many forms. The encounter had ended without violence, but the lesson had been clear. Respect, awareness, and calm authority could achieve what aggression never could. Later that evening, Alex sat on his porch, the quiet of the neighborhood settling around him. He watched as the streetlights flickered on, illuminating the familiar houses and parked cars. It was in these moments of stillness that he often reflected on life, on the choices he made, and on the lessons he had learned. Today's events had reminded him that life often presented tests, not